Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Drunken Noodles. That's right, I am not as thick as you drunk I am. Although in the spirit of full disclosure, I did have a drink or three while doing this, so I could enjoy this as the food gods intended, which is slightly drunk. Or at least that's the main theory of how this dish got its name. Right, the other theory is that it got the name because at one point it was made with wine. But that's not as entertaining, so we're going to go with the first story. And speaking of firsts, the first thing we'll do to get started is prep our noodles. And for this, if we can find them, we want to use some dried rice noodles, which really do look and feel like plastic. And what we'll do is take these and transfer them into a bowl of hot tap water. And we don't want to waste any. But anyway, we'll go ahead and submerge those, and we will let them soak for about 10 to 15 minutes. And how long this is going to take is going to depend on the size of your noodle, as well as the exact temperature of your water. And in case you're keeping score at home, mine was exactly 120 degrees. And a couple times while those are soaking, we might want to kind of swish them around a little to help separate them, as that will help this rehydrate a little more uniformly. And if everything goes according to plan, about 15 minutes later, our noodles should be flexible and sort of look like this. And if they don't, just simply let them soak a few more minutes. And once those have softened up to the point of flexibility, we'll go ahead and drain off the water. At which point these are now ready to stir fry, just as soon as we get the rest of our ingredients together. And while we're doing that so these don't dry out, I like to place a wet paper towel over the top. Which reminds me, sometimes in the summer when it's really hot, I'll do the exact same thing to my bald spot. Which is not a great look, but it does help keep you cool. And that's it. Once our noodles are prepped, we can move on to the rest of the ingredients, beginning with the absolutely mandatory ones, which include some thinly sliced shallots, which look like this, and you can find them, but if you can't, you can just use onion. And then we're also going to want some sliced scallions, as well as a whole bunch of finely minced garlic. Plus, if we can find them, a whole bunch of sliced Thai bird chilies, which yes, are very, very hot. And if you can't find them, any hot pepper will work. Or you can use sweet pepper and make up the difference with hot chili flakes. And then the last of the required ingredients would be a whole bunch of basil, preferably Thai basil, which besides being gorgeous, is much more fragrant and flavorful. But if you can't find it, don't worry. This will still be great with regular basil, especially after a couple drinks. I mean, at one time or another, we've all been regular basil. Am I right? But anyway, those are the mandatory items. And then as far as the optional ingredients go, we generally want to use some kind of meat and vegetable, which for me is going to be some thinly sliced boneless, skinless chicken thigh, as well as some Chinese broccoli. And because the stem section takes longer to cook, I like to separate that from the tender leaves, and then slice that thinly at an angle so we can cook that first. And then we can tear or slice up the leaves, and we'll add those later since those cook really fast. And that's it. The only other thing we have to prep is our not-so-secret sauce, which starts with some oyster sauce, which you can find in any big grocery store, usually right next to the soy sauce. Speaking of which, we also want some soy sauce. And traditionally, something called dark soy sauce is also added, which is a thicker, sweeter soy sauce. But that's not that easy to find. And I think just regular soy sauce works fine. And then we'll also want to add a little bit of Asian fish sauce. And then to balance all the heat and saltiness, we will do a little bit of maple syrup, plus a spoon of white sugar. Although I'm pretty sure we're supposed to be using palm sugar, which I'm not sure you have. And if you don't, this combo works great. And then last but not least, we'll add a couple tablespoons of cold fresh water. And that's it. We'll give this a quick stir, at which point we're ready to start cooking our drunken noodles. And for that, we will place a wok or large frying pan over medium-high heat, in which we have a couple tablespoons of vegetable oil, plus about 1 teaspoon of sesame oil, which as you can see, I'm very carefully measuring in. And perfect. And once our oil's hot, we'll go ahead and toss in our shallots, plus our Thai bird chilies, or whatever chilies we're going to use. And then we'll also at this point add our garlic. And then we'll stir fry this for about 2 minutes or so, or until those shallots start to soften up. Oh, and speaking of stir frying, if you're wondering if this is going to be just as good not using a wok, well, yes, it is. It's going to taste exactly the same. But there is an advantage of using a wok, in that it's going to be deeper and wider with sloped edges. So it's just going to be a lot easier to make in a wok. So for that very good reason, if you want to rock a wok, go ahead. Okay, unfortunately, I do not have a wok to rock. A wok to rock. But the good news is a large nonstick skillet will work just fine. But anyway, once we've stir-fried that for a couple minutes, we will use our spatula to make a space in the middle, where we will transfer our chicken, or whatever thin strips of raw meat we're going to use. And what we'll do is kind of arrange that into a single layer, and we'll let that sear for about a minute, at which point we'll grab our spatula and give everything a good mix. And really, all we're trying to accomplish here is giving that chicken a little head start before we add the next ingredient, which will be our thinly sliced Chinese broccoli stems. And we will stir fry that for about 2 minutes or so, or until it just starts to get tender. And one of your visual clues is that the pan's going to get steamy, since once it does start to soften up, it releases moisture, which of course turns into steam. And that is one clue you've gone far enough. Or of course you could just taste a piece. And by now our chicken should also be cooked through, which means we can stop and stir in our Chinese broccoli leaves. And remember that thing I just said about a wok being easier to use? This is what I'm talking about. All right, if we were using a wok, we could be stirring this with reckless abandon, instead of having to go slow and be careful so we don't knock all the stuff out of the pan. And by the way, if you can't find Chinese broccoli, you can do the exact same thing with bok choy, which is very delicious in this. Or you can use things like sliced asparagus or zucchini, or even partially cook some broccoli and slice it up and toss that in. And then what we'll do just as soon as our leaves have wilted is pour in our drunken noodle sauce, as well as our sliced green onions. And we'll give everything a mix. And we will wait for that sauce to start simmering. And just as soon as it does, we'll go ahead and transfer in our soaked noodles, which are flexible, but definitely not cooked. And we'll grab our tongs, and we will start tossing those in the hot sauce, secretly wishing we had a wok. And then listen to me now and hear me later. This dish is done as soon as our rice noodles have absorbed the sauce and they've taken on the texture of perfectly cooked pasta. All right, not soft and mushy pasta, and not firm and starchy undercooked pasta, but perfectly toothsome pasta, which is going to take a couple minutes of tossing in the sauce. And again, just like the soaking, that's going to depend on the exact size of your noodle. All right, these were pretty wide, but if the store you went to only had those thinner kind, the ones usually used in pad thai, those might get done quicker. So the point is pay attention. And that's it. Once we're happy with the doneness, we can turn off the heat. And we will stir in 1 large handful of our basil leaves. And as soon as those are stirred in and wilt, which is only going to take a couple seconds, all we have to do is taste this for seasoning, which I did. And I thought to myself, man, those could not be any better. And also, I wonder what that helicopter is doing over our neighbor's house. But anyway, the point is this looked good, smelled good, felt good, and tasted good. So I pulled it off the heat and served up. And some folks like to garnish this with some fresh lime, but I don't. And I love lime. But I just don't want that extra acidity, since I really do think all these flavors are perfectly balanced. So I simply garnished with a sprig of Thai basil. And then I grabbed a fork and dug in, because I can barely use chopsticks perfectly sober. And it might be the 2 double IPAs talking, but that, my friends, is one of the best noodle dishes I've ever eaten. At least this week. Right, this is hot and sweet and salty and super savory. And I find the texture of those rice noodles very, very addictive. And I really do love this with the chicken. And I would say that's my go-to protein for this. But it's also amazing with pork. And besides that, beef would be great, shrimp would be great. Or, since this is so savory and so delicious, you don't have to use any meat if you don't want to. I mean, you are, after all, the drunk of eating like a Buddhist monk. And I've actually done this with fried tofu, and it's absolutely wonderful. Especially, yes, you guessed it, after a couple drinks. And by the way, my attorney would like me to inform you that I was totally kidding about drinking while I'm cooking, allegedly. Of course, that would be dangerous and irresponsible. So if you are going to partake, do it during the eating stage, and not during the working with sharp knives or being next to a fire stage. But anyway, that's it. What they call drunken noodles, or pad ki mao as I think our Thai friends would say, except they'd pronounce it correctly. This really is a magnificent noodle dish, and whether you eat it drunk or not, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.